Stop blaming aging. If you're over 60 and losing muscle, it's not because exercise stopped working. It's because one invisible vitamin is missing, and without it, your muscles don't even hear the signal to grow. Today, I'll reveal the vitamin your body needs before protein or training can help. For decades, vitamin D has been spoken about in narrow terms, almost exclusively as a bone nutrient, something relevant to fractures or osteoporosis, but disconnected from strength itself. That framing misses a deeper reality. Muscle tissue is not passive. It is biologically active, highly communicative, and filled with receptors that respond to signals from the bloodstream. Among those signals are vitamin D receptors, embedded directly in muscle fibers. These receptors influence how muscles contract, how they coordinate with nerves, and how effectively they initiate the processes that lead to protein synthesis. When vitamin D is low, those receptors sit idle. The muscle is present, but its internal messaging system is muted. A useful way to picture this is to imagine a room wired with modern electrical equipment, but the main power switch is turned halfway off. The machinery exists, the structure is intact, yet performance never reaches its potential. Vitamin D functions like that power switch. Without adequate levels, the muscle's ability to fully activate and adapt remains limited. This helps explain a pattern I've seen repeatedly. Older adults who train consistently, who show up week after week, yet feel persistently weak or unstable despite their efforts. Ellen, 76, was one of them. Her routine never changed, but her strength did. Only after a deficiency was corrected did her body begin to respond in a way that finally matched her consistency. In this context, low vitamin D is not a lifestyle flaw or a matter of wellness optimization. It represents a clinical gap, a missing biological requirement that quietly undermines progress while everything else appears to be in place. As the years pass, many people begin to interpret subtle physical changes as unavoidable signs of aging. Slower steps, less confidence in balance, a sense that the body no longer trusts itself. What often goes unrecognized is how strongly low vitamin D is associated with these very outcomes. Research has repeatedly linked insufficient levels to poorer physical performance, reduced gait speed, and a higher likelihood of frailty, particularly in older adults with limited sun exposure. The muscles don't just weaken, they lose precision. Imagine moving through a dimly lit space where every step requires more attention than it used to. Nothing dramatic happens at first, but stability erodes quietly. Each movement carries a little more uncertainty. That is what vitamin D deficiency can feel like at the neuromuscular level. The signal between the brain and the muscle becomes less reliable. Balance becomes harder to maintain, not because the muscles are gone, but because their coordination is impaired. When vitamin D levels are restored, that internal lighting improves. Strength work begins to translate into steadiness again. Balance improves not in isolation, but alongside better muscular response. This is why restoring vitamin D status often coincides with improvements that go beyond raw strength. Independence feels less fragile. Movement regains a sense of predictability. The body becomes easier to inhabit. Faced with the realization that something has been missing, the natural impulse is to overcorrect. Bigger doses, faster fixes, yet biology rarely rewards excess. Large clinical trials have consistently shown that people who already have sufficient vitamin D gain little from pushing levels higher, and in some cases, aggressive dosing can disrupt calcium balance and create new problems. The system is delicate. It responds best to restoration, not overload. The plant analogy fits here for a reason. Water sustains growth, but too much drowns the roots. In the same way, vitamin D supports muscular and neurological function up to a point, beyond which the benefit plateaus or reverses. I've seen individuals whose progress stalled not because vitamin D was absent, but because it was being used without restraint. Strength returned only after dosing was brought back into a moderate, physiologically appropriate range. In older adults, expert discussions often settle around amounts that restore normal signaling rather than chase extremes, commonly in the range of 800 to 1000 IU per day, adjusted for body size, diet, medications, and medical context. The goal is not to flood the system, but to bring it back into balance. When that balance is restored, the body no longer wastes energy compensating for a missing signal. It simply does its job more effectively. If this is changing how you think about muscle loss after 60, subscribe to the channel. I share the clinical truths that help your body respond again, not just work harder. What tends to unsettle people the most is not the presence of weakness, but the feeling that effort has lost its meaning. The weights are still lifted, the walks are still taken, meals are planned with care, protein added deliberately, yet the body responds with indifference. This disconnect creates a quiet despair that many older adults never voice out loud. What's happening beneath the surface is not a lack of willpower or commitment. It is a breakdown in communication. Vitamin D plays a critical role in restoring that communication, not by adding strength directly, but by allowing other inputs to finally register. Muscle tissue depends on clear signaling between the nervous system and the muscle fibers themselves. Every movement begins as an electrical impulse, translated into contraction through finely tuned biochemical processes. Vitamin D supports this neuromuscular signaling, influencing how efficiently nerves activate muscle fibers and how well those fibers coordinate their response. When vitamin D levels are low, that signaling becomes inefficient. Movements still occur, but they are less synchronized, less forceful, and less adaptive. Strength training under these conditions can feel like shouting instructions through a wall. The message is sent, but it never fully lands. Protein follows a similar pattern. Amino acids are the raw materials of muscle repair and maintenance, but they require the right internal environment to be assembled into functional tissue. Adequate vitamin D appears to enhance the muscle's sensitivity to protein intake, helping shift those amino acids away from being burned for energy and toward being used for structure. When vitamin D is insufficient, the body prioritizes survival over rebuilding. Protein is consumed, but its impact on muscle tissue is blunted. The person eating carefully sees little return, reinforcing the belief that aging has permanently closed the door on improvement. This is why correcting vitamin D status often produces a subtle but meaningful change in how the body responds. It is not an overnight transformation. Muscles do not suddenly grow or strength skyrocket. Instead, there is a restoration of fairness in the system. Effort begins to correlate with outcome again. People notice that soreness after training feels purposeful rather than punishing, that movements feel more coordinated, that progress, while still gradual, no longer feels impossible. Functional improvements appear quietly. Standing from a chair becomes smoother. Carrying objects feels more secure. Grip strength stabilizes instead of slipping year after year. What's important here is restraint. In a culture that rewards extremes, it's tempting to believe that higher levels will produce greater effects. Biology rarely works that way, especially in older systems that value stability over intensity. The benefits of vitamin D emerge when normal physiology is restored, not when it is pushed beyond its natural range. Muscles are remarkably conservative tissues. They respond best to signals they recognize as familiar and safe. Excessive dosing can distort those signals, creating imbalances that undermine the very progress people are seeking. There is also a psychological shift that occurs when the focus moves away from optimization and toward restoration. Instead of chasing ideal numbers, attention returns to function. Can the body rise, carry, stabilize, and recover? These outcomes matter far more than a lab value at the top of a reference range. When vitamin D is adequate, the body stops diverting energy toward compensating for deficiency. Resources are freed up for repair, coordination, and adaptation. Training becomes instruction again rather than noise. Nutrition becomes construction rather than fuel alone. Consistency then takes on a different meaning. It is no longer about forcing results, but about maintaining an environment in which results are possible. Vitamin D levels naturally fluctuate with seasons, sunlight exposure, and changes in health status. Adjustments over time reflect responsiveness rather than rigidity. This flexibility mirrors how the body itself operates. Aging does not eliminate adaptability, it narrows the margin for error. Keeping signals within a normal supportive range reduces that error and allows the system to function with less friction. Perhaps the most reassuring aspect of this process is how unremarkable it feels once balance is restored. There is no sense of hacking the body or overriding its limits. Instead, there is a quiet return to competence. Muscles respond because they are allowed to, not because they are being forced. Strength improves because the conditions for improvement have been re-established. In this light, vitamin D is not a performance enhancer. It is a permission structure. When that permission is granted, the body does what it has always known how to do, even later in life. What often gets misunderstood about aging is the assumption that every loss of strength is permanent. Vitamin D challenges that assumption, not because it reverses time, but because it removes a condition that quietly accelerates decline. It was never meant to act as a shortcut or a replacement for effort. Its role is far more restrained and far more important. When vitamin D is low, the body operates under limitation, rationing strength, balance, and repair in ways that feel like aging, but are actually deficiency-driven. When that limitation is removed, the system does not become extraordinary. It becomes functional again. The people who experience the greatest benefit are not those searching for optimization, but those who were restricted to begin with. In deficiency, muscles lose sensitivity to signals. Nerves fire less efficiently. Protein intake supports survival rather than rebuilding. Correcting vitamin D status restores that internal communication. The body stops compensating for what it lacks and begins allocating resources toward response. This is why improvements often appear in practical, unglamorous ways. Standing feels steadier. Movements feel more predictable. Strength aligns more closely with effort. These changes are not dramatic, but they are meaningful, especially when independence depends on them. Muscle response is inseparable from balance and coordination. When vitamin D is within a healthy range, neuromuscular signaling improves, and the margin for error in movement widens. That margin matters. It influences how quickly the body corrects itself, how confidently it navigates uneven ground, and how well it recovers from small disruptions. Fewer falls are not simply the result of stronger muscles, but of muscles that receive and act on signals without delay or distortion. In this sense, vitamin D contributes as much to stability as it does to strength. The analogy often attributed to Peter Attia captures this clearly. Nutrients do not replace training. They unlock the body's ability to adapt to it. Vitamin D is not the engine and not the fuel. It is the key. Without it, effort produces noise. With it, the same effort produces change. Nothing about the work itself changes. What changes is the body's willingness to respond. This understanding also helps remove the emotional weight that often surrounds supplements. Vitamin D works best when approached clinically, not as a symbol of hope or fear. It is a variable that can be out of range, corrected, and maintained. Pushing levels beyond what the body recognizes as normal does not improve outcomes and can undermine them. The benefit comes from restoration, not excess. Muscles respond to signals they recognize, not extremes they must defend against. When vitamin D is in range, effort begins to count again, not in the way it did decades ago, and not without time, but with consistency and fairness. The body responds proportionally. Strength returns slowly but reliably. Balance stabilizes. Confidence in movement grows. This is not reversal of aging. It is removal of an unnecessary obstacle. And for many people over 60, that removal is enough to change what they believe their body is still capable of. If this is helping you understand why effort hasn't been paying off, stay with this channel. We focus on removing the hidden barriers so your body can respond again, clearly and reliably.